We must break the will of our enemy and end this war.
The Crown will pursue victory at any cost.
I did not think they would be so eager to die.
You must see in me a ruler. And the symbols of authority are not jewels and gowns, but the shield and the sword. The Targaryen who sits the Iron Throne is not just a king or a queen. They are a protector of the realm.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. HBO released more House of the Dragon Season 2 trailer footage with a bunch more Easter eggs and references to the prophecy of the Prince Who Was Promised, also now known as the prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire, Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy of the Long Night, the events of the original series with the Night King, so we'll break it all down. There's a bunch of other footage here too, so we'll talk about that too, but the main stuff here is the prophecy that they're hyping on. If you're brand new to the channel, I'll be doing videos for all the episodes just like I did for Season 1 and for the main show. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. I'll also do a giveaway for max subscriptions once we actually get started with episodes in a couple weeks. We don't have to wait that long, so congratulations, you made it. Just starting with the big prophecy stuff first, all these Easter eggs, since it's like the biggest lore connection the show has made during this part of the timeline, much closer to the beginning of the Targaryens' reign over Westeros since the time of Aegon the Conqueror. The vast majority of the show could be just boiled down to a Succession-style plot like the Succession HBO show with all the children vying over control over their father's empire. But the way they've connected the events of the Dance of the Dragons to the larger lore of A Song of Ice and Fire series, like the main novels, is by showing how this influences the prophecy of the Prince Who Was Promised in the beginning of this period when the prophecy itself is created by Aegon the Conqueror himself. And how the events of the Dance of the Dragons, the actual civil war that they're fighting starting this season, like the actual fighting starts, almost all but destroys Aegon's desire to stop what we know to be the Second Long Night in the coming of the Night King, or the return of the Night King. And even though primarily during Season 1 we saw Viserys pass the knowledge of the prophecy, the existence of the White Walkers to Rhaenyra, the big caveat is that only the next successor, the next king or queen of the realm, wound up learning the prophecy, so it was only passed down from ruler to ruler. Going back before the conquest when Aegon actually had the dragon dream, this was during the Century of Blood, the period right before the conquest that was after the Doom of Valyria. Like that was the next big period of conflict in Essos. Basically, the power vacuum left in the Doom had all this free territory all over Essos, so you have all these different states vying over control of what was left. During that period, Aegon was actually very active on Balerion the Black Dread, helping different people who had petitioned him for help because the Targaryens had their dragons still. Like, please bring your nuclear weapons and help us win some of these battles. So even before the conquest, Aegon is very active doing stuff like this. He also married both of his sister wives before the conquest. But at some point towards the end of that period, he has his dragon dream about the Long Night and decides the only way to stop it from happening and destroying the entire world is to unite the seven kingdoms of Westeros so that they can face it with all their combined forces. Apes strong together. But because the seven different kingdoms did not want to unite, he had to forcibly conquer them in order to bring them all together. So the House of the Dragon show added this new bit of lore. It's kind of a retcon, but George R. R. Martin actually wrote it in himself. Like, he wrote the Season 1 scripts, he writes on them with Season 2 and all the future seasons, a lot of these other spin-off shows too. So technically this comes from him. It's like George R. R. Martin adding stuff to his lore. And it was to say the whole reason for the conquest was Aegon's dragon dream. He had that prophecy etched on the Valyrian dagger by Valyrian pyromancers so that only fire could tell the tale, to make a Lord of the Rings reference. And decided at the time that they would only pass the secret of the prophecy to each successor who would sit the Iron Throne. He passed it to his son and heir, Aenys I. Maegor the Cruel and his mother Visenya orchestrated his takeover of the Iron Throne instead of Aenys' heirs. So I think the idea is that Maegor did not learn the prophecy, but Aenys was able to tell his heirs about the prophecy so that it passed to Jaehaerys I when he eventually took the Iron Throne from Maegor the Cruel. Then during the events of the Great Council, you have Viserys I being named the next heir. Jaehaerys tells him about the prophecy, and then he eventually tells Rhaenyra. Fun fact too, Aenys' first heir, who was supposed to sit the Iron Throne instead of Maegor the Cruel, was also named Aegon, so if he'd actually sat the throne, he would have been called Aegon II, not the one in present day. If Jon Snow had eventually sat the Iron Throne, he would have been named Aegon VI. You only get that extra little title like the 5th, the 6th, and so on if you actually sit the Iron Throne. So you have to imagine that the Targaryen family tree is littered across history with hundreds and hundreds of Aegons just because he was such a popular figure in their family that everybody wanted to name their kid Aegon. So in present day, you have to imagine that Rhaenyra is a very traditional, old-school Targaryen by the book, even though she mentioned the prophecy to Daemon, so technically Daemon knows it now, even though it seemed like he didn't want to believe it. Rhaenyra would also choose to tell her chosen heir, who right now is Jacaerys. So in the trailer, when we're getting that voiceover from Rhaenyra saying whoever sits the Iron Throne isn't just there for the fun parts of being a ruler, they're meant to be a protector of the realm, and you see the scene of Jacaerys going to the wall, looking out over the north with Cregan Stark. They might be foreshadowing Jacaerys actually knowing the prophecy and knowing about the White Walkers and the Night King when he's seeing north of the wall. It really changes what's going on during this scene too. It just makes it so much more dynamic. So you have to imagine in present day, if Daemon doesn't care about the prophecy, Jacaerys would be the only other person who's alive and cares about it. Fun fact, the prophecy is called the Prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire technically. It's a callback to the book series, yes, like the main books. But when he originally went to the north to treat with Cregan Stark and get his allegiance, they became such good bros that they trained together, they hunted together, they drank together. He was meant to be up in the north for a great long while in the book. Like, they didn't have the whole fast travel system. So the book plays out over a much longer period of time, seemingly, as opposed to like the show, where things move around way quicker. But before Jacaerys left Winterfell, they formed a pact called the Pact of Ice and Fire because of the union of their two houses. Going back to the main series, in context of the overarching story, there was this long-standing theory that the prophecy was also misinterpreted because it was written in High Valyrian. So the prince who was promised is actually a non-gender term, like there's no Valyrian gender term for prince or princess, so it could have meant the prince or princess who was promised. So the real ultimate fulfillment of the prophecy was the union of ice and fire, like Jon Snow and Daenerys coming together, fighting the White Walkers and the Night King. They would have been the people Aegon the Conqueror saw in his dragon dream, but at the time he probably just didn't know it was them that he was seeing because it was so far off. I don't know who you are, but you will be of my blood at some point. And if you don't remember, Jon Snow and Daenerys were part of the same family. They did share blood together. Daenerys would technically be his aunt. There were all the jokes about that at the time, like get it on within the family. Jaime and Cersei would be proud. Jon Snow's northern values caused him to kind of revile that, like he didn't like the idea that they actually came from the same family. But Daenerys didn't care about it at all, like it didn't bother her a wink. In fact, before she was promised to Khal Drogo, back before the events of Season 1, she actually assumed that she would grow up and marry her brother, Viserys. Just like in present day, even though Alicent really hates the idea of Targaryens intermarrying within the family, you have Aegon II marrying his sister, Helaena Targaryen. But one of the important questions that a lot of people ask during Season 1, they'll ask it during Season 2, is why was the prophecy lost until the time of Rhaegar Targaryen over 100 years later? The real answer to that is because everyone who knew the prophecy in present day during the dance wound up dying before being able to pass it on to people from the Targaryen family who did survive the dance. Without getting too far ahead of the story, it kind of gets into spoilers even though the story has been out there for a long time. You can actually go read how this all ends right now if you want. But for very important reasons, that's what we'll say, just important reasons, because Rhaenyra does not tell her youngest sons, Aegon III or Viserys II. Those are her sons with Daemon. The reason why Rhaegar learned the prophecy again in the present day of his time, like the original Game of Thrones series before Robert's Rebellion, is probably because he came into possession of the Valyrian dagger just because it passed down through their family line, eventually came to him because he was the heir apparent when he was alive. At some point on accident or on purpose, he heated the blade up, making the prophecy visible so that he saw the High Valyrian characters. He spoke High Valyrian, as did all members of the family. The books actually tell about him doing a lot of research at the Maester Citadel in the hidden areas that Samwell had to actually break into to get information on the Long Night. As the heir apparent, Rhaegar wouldn't have been able to access those without any trouble, like he could just tell the Maesters to let him in. It's there that he probably gets more information and context for the Long Night and learns fully about the prince who was promised. Here's the thing though too, Maester Aemon also learned the prophecy at some point too, because in the books he tells Samwell that for a time he thought that Rhaegar was meant to be the prince who was promised. What might have happened if Aemon didn't learn the prophecy himself also is that Rhaegar could have learned about the prophecy from the Valyrian dagger and then told Maester Aemon, and they started doing research together via correspondence via Raven. But at some point during all that, he meets Lyanna Stark as the Knight of the Laughing Tree at the Great Tourney of Harrenhal, falls in love with her. Their affair starts. He puts aside his current wife, Elia Martell, so that his marriage to Lyanna Stark could be legitimate in the eyes of the Faith of the Seven, the Church in the realm, which is why Jon Snow was a legitimate heir with a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than Daenerys, because Rhaegar was the last heir before he died, so it passed to Jon Snow per the rules of the kingdom at the time. But then Robert's Rebellion happens, then Ned Stark comes and finds out what's going on and takes him home to Winterfell, pretending that he's his bastard. And even though the original show made it clear that he married Lyanna Stark because he loved her, the books also implied that Rhaegar was very obsessed with the prophecy, so he probably thought a child of theirs could be the fulfillment of the prophecy, because their union would be a union of ice and fire. But there's a bunch of other footage going on in here too in this trailer that doesn't have anything to do with the actual prophecy. Like Rhaenyra basically calling their banners to war when she says she needs the small folk in the realm to see her as a ruler, a fighter with a sword and shield, basically saying it's time to throw down. They're actually changing her storyline from the Fire and Blood book and basically saying that she was more active during the dance, like she'll actually do some dragon riding, because the books make it seem like she spent the entire dance healing from her miscarriage during season 1, and the dance only lasted for a couple years. So in the book, she doesn't actually participate in any of the really big battles. The show is changing that though. We probably won't see her in any actual big battles though till like season 3. These two dragons here, this scene probably at Rook's Rest. This looks like Vhagar, maybe the other one is Sunfire if they're not actually fighting each other here. There's a couple new scenes of Daemon, of Aemon. They really want to hype up their conflict, but like the Battle of the God's Eye probably isn't going to happen till like the final scene, like season 4, because Daemon, for instance, played by Matt Smith, is the highest paid actor on the show. They definitely want to keep him around as long as they can. There's like a whole subplot during season 2 of Daemon versus Rhaenyra too. Like he basically loses her trust. There's a bit of a betrayal and she starts to suspect Daemon of building an army in secret in the Riverlands, getting ready to march on King's Landing. Matt Smith also says that all this time of them just waiting to actually start fighting and not actual fighting causes Daemon to start to unravel too. Like he starts to actually lose it. That's probably the reason why he leaves and goes to Harrenhal to try and take it with Caraxes. He gets so mad at Rhaenyra for not actually starting any fighting and just gets so stir-crazy that he just takes off. Both he and Aemon would just do absolutely anything to start at all-out open war right now, just burn the realm to the ground. They just want to battle so badly. Little do they know, they'll eventually get that battle. But if there's any other Easter eggs or references that you spotted in this new footage that I didn't talk about in the video or my previous videos, write it below in the comments. We'll probably get a couple more trailers or some clips before episode 1 happens, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of that. June and July are going to be stacked. We have House of the Dragon Season 2 episodes, The Boys Season 4 episodes, and Acolyte episodes. It is going to be crazy. Everybody click here for my Blood and Cheese video, and click here for all my other House of the Dragon Season 2 videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.